the first president of the United States, a hero of the Revolutionary War, and the man known as the Father of America, George Washington. He was more than just a leader. His life was filled with sacrifice, leadership, and inspiring stories. Today, we delve deeply into the most touching moments of George Washington's life, childhood, and growth. George Washington was born on February 22, 1732, in the Virginia colony. His family was a middle-class farming family, but they were not wealthy. From a young age, Washington demonstrated a strong sense of responsibility and valued honesty above all else. Looking back at his childhood, several key events shaped his character. His father, Augustine Washington, always emphasized the importance of honesty and responsibility. Like the famous cherry tree story suggests, his father believed that admitting mistakes with honesty was crucial. Washington grew up with 6 siblings, and among them, he was the most responsible. However, his life took a drastic turn when his father suddenly passed away, when George was just 11 years old. Without his father's guidance, he had to rely on self-education. Though he did not receive extensive formal schooling, he developed a deep understanding of surveying and mathematics through independent study. Since he could not attend school regularly, Washington had to educate himself. He had an insatiable curiosity and absorbed knowledge through books. He was particularly fascinated by classical literature and military strategy. On his desk, one could always find books, such as Julius Caesar's commentaries on the Gallic War. His first profession was as a surveyor. At the age of 16, he began working as an official surveyor, mapping new lands in Western Virginia. Through this experience, he developed a love for nature and honed his practical problem-solving skills. Later, he joined the military, which would completely change the course of his life. The Revolutionary War and inspiring moments. In 1754, Washington had his first military engagement. During the French and Indian War, although he experienced significant defeats, he demonstrated his natural leadership and earned the trust of his superiors. This experience would prove invaluable in the coming American Revolution. In 1775, the American Revolutionary War broke out. The colonial army had to fight against the formidable British forces, and despite facing seemingly insurmountable odds, they never gave up. Leading them through these trials was none other than George Washington. However, his journey was far from easy. Victory was never guaranteed, and at times, he found himself on the brink of despair, especially during the harsh winter months. When his soldiers were starving and losing the will to fight, Washington stood before them and instilled hope. One of the most inspiring moments of the Revolutionary War occurred on Christmas night in 1776. At that time, the American army had suffered a series of defeats, and morale was at an all-time low. Many soldiers deserted, and those who remained were freezing and starving. But Washington refused to surrender. He addressed his troops with these words: "This fight was destined before we were even born. It is our duty to pass on the gift of freedom to our descendants." Then he made a bold decision to cross the frozen Delaware River and launch a surprise attack on the enemy. That night, soldiers risked their lives crossing the river, dodging chunks of ice. Their fingers froze, and some even perished in the frigid waters. But Washington led from the front, encouraging his troops with unwavering determination. The surprise attack turned out to be a resounding success, securing a crucial victory for the American forces. This moment changed the tide of the war. Later, Washington's leadership led to the decisive victory at the Battle of Yorktown, where the British ultimately surrendered, securing America's independence. Farewell at Fraunces Tavern, 1783. By 1783, the war was over. Washington had the opportunity to seize absolute power, even becoming a king if he wished. But he made a different choice. He decided to relinquish all power. At a small tavern in New York, Fraunces Tavern, he gathered his closest generals to bid them farewell. He attempted to speak, but overwhelmed with emotion, he had to pause. Finally, in a quiet yet firm voice, he said, "It is now time to say goodbye. My beloved comrades, I will remember you forever." One by one, Washington embraced his officers. The room was filled with quiet sobs, and tears streamed down the faces of battle-hardened men. With that, Washington stepped outside and took his final leave from the army. Even after retiring from the military, Washington dedicated himself to building the foundations of the new nation as its first president. His legacy endures to this day. His final moments as president. Visuals Washington in the White House, fulfilling his presidential duties. As the first president of the United States, Washington successfully completed 2 terms in office. He demonstrated strong leadership, laid the groundwork for the nation, and upheld the principles of the Constitution and democracy. In 1797, he voluntarily stepped down from the presidency and retired to his home in Mount Vernon, Virginia. Until his final moments, he remained concerned for the welfare of the nation and left behind invaluable advice for future generations. His final words were simple, but carried profound meaning. "I now depart in peace, but the freedom of America will endure forever."